It had been a long day for the young woman who worked quietly in the corner of the catering team. Her name was Lena, though few at the event even cared to ask. She moved swiftly through the grand hall, balancing trays filled with shining glasses and golden plates. The house was breathtaking. Wide marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and laughter echoing through every corner. It was the kind of place she had only seen in magazines, a world that felt light years away from her own. The mansion belonged to a wealthy businessman who was celebrating his son's birthday. Guests arrived in shining cars, dressed in expensive suits and sparkling gowns. The place looked like a movie set. Everyone carried the same confident smile, the kind that came from never worrying about bills or bus fares. For Lena, who had taken 3 buses to reach the place, it was a world she didn't belong to, but she had learned how to blend in, how to disappear into the background, how to serve quietly and move like a shadow. She had been working as a part-time helper for almost a year now, ever since she dropped out of college to care for her younger brother. Their mother had passed away years earlier, leaving behind only a few things: an old piano, a faded photograph, and the memory of music that used to fill their tiny home. That piano had been her mother's treasure. It sat now in their small apartment, covered with a white sheet to protect it from dust. Lena hadn't touched it in years. Every time she walked past it, her heart tightened. Music used to be her world. Her mother had taught her every note, every key with patience and warmth.
"One day you'll make people feel something beautiful," her mother used to say.
But life had other plans. When her mother fell ill, lessons stopped, dreams paused, and everything that once made her happy began to fade behind the noise of real-world struggles. That evening, as she moved from table to table refilling glasses, Lena tried not to notice the piano standing in the middle of the hall, a grand, glossy black instrument that seemed to shine under the golden lights. It looked exactly like the one she used to dream of owning. But in this house, it was just another decoration. Nobody cared about the music it could make. The party was loud. People laughed, glasses clinked, and a group of young guests sat near the piano, clearly enjoying their own jokes. They looked bored and spoiled, dressed in designer clothes and sipping drinks as if life itself existed only to entertain them. Lena had noticed them earlier when she brought snacks to their table. They had laughed about how boring the evening was, saying they needed something fun to spice things up. She didn't think much of it until she passed by them again and heard one of the boys whisper, "What about her?" The group turned their eyes toward her. She didn't hear the rest, but their snickers told her it wasn't kind. A few minutes later, as Lena tried to collect empty plates, the same boy, tall, confident, and obviously used to being the center of attention, called out, "Hey, you there!" She froze for a moment, unsure if he was talking to her. When she looked up, his grin widened. "Yeah, you. Don't be shy." The room wasn't quiet, but somehow his voice carried enough weight to turn a few heads. Lena forced a polite smile and walked over, trying not to show how nervous she felt.
"Yes, sir?"
she asked softly. He pointed to the piano behind him. "You look like you know how to play that thing. Why don't you give us a little show?" His friends burst into laughter, clearly enjoying the idea. Lena blinked, taken aback. "Oh no, I don't," she began, but another girl interrupted, grinning wickedly. "Come on, it's just for fun. You do know what a piano is, right?" Laughter erupted again. A few nearby guests turned to see what was happening, sensing the brewing drama. Lena felt her face flush with embarrassment. She wanted to walk away, but something about the boy's stare kept her frozen. "It's just a joke," he said, pretending to sound kind. "Don't take it seriously. We just want to hear a song. Surely you can play something." Her fingers tightened around the tray she held. The urge to defend herself rose in her chest, but years of working in silence had taught her one thing: arguing never ended well. She took a quiet breath and said gently, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm here to serve food, not to entertain." The boy leaned back, amused. "You're refusing your boss's guests? That's not very polite, is it?" His words dripped with fake charm, but his tone carried a challenge. The others watched like it was a performance. Lena's supervisor, seeing the situation, hurried over. "Is everything all right here?" he asked quickly. "Oh yes," the boy said with a grin. "We just wanted to see if your staff can play. We thought she might lighten the mood." The supervisor gave Lena a warning glance, the kind that silently said, "Don't cause trouble." He whispered, "Just play something small, please. They're important guests." Lena's throat tightened. She glanced around the room, at the laughing faces, at the glowing lights, at the piano that seemed to mock her silence. She didn't want to do it, but saying no could risk her job, and she couldn't afford to lose it. Rent was due next week, so she nodded slowly, placing her tray down on a nearby table. "All right," she said quietly. A cheer rose from the group as if they had won something. The boy clapped his hands. "See, that's the spirit," he said, turning to his friends. "Let's see what kind of music our little helper has for us." Lena walked toward the piano, her shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. The chatter in the room softened as people began to notice what was happening. She sat down on the polished bench, staring at the keys that glimmered under the light. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, trembling hands. For a moment she didn't move. Her heart raced so fast she could hear it in her ears. She hadn't touched a piano in years. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed even harder? She could already hear the whispers behind her. "Bet she doesn't even know where middle C is," one of the girls snorted. But as her fingers hovered above the keys, something strange happened. The noise around her faded into silence. The sound of laughter, the clinking glasses, even her fear, all of it blurred. She felt as if time slowed down, and she could almost hear her mother's voice from years ago, whispering softly, "When you touch the piano, let it speak for you." Her chest tightened. For the first time in a long while, she remembered what that felt like, the connection between her heart and her hands. She closed her eyes for a second and pressed one key gently. The soft sound echoed through the hall. It was just a single note, but it made her feel something again, something she thought she had lost. The boy raised an eyebrow, pretending to yawn. "Come on, don't keep us waiting," he said, earning another round of laughter. Lena took a deep breath. Her hands shook slightly, but her fingers remembered what her mind had forgotten. She played another note, then another, in a slow, hesitant but real. The crowd expected chaos, a silly attempt, something to laugh about. Instead, what they heard next would soon silence them all. But that moment, that single second before everything changed, hung heavy in the air. Nobody knew that the quiet girl they were mocking was about to remind everyone in that room what true talent sounded like. Lena didn't know it either. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she was about to let her heart speak again. The first few seconds were filled with quiet giggles. People leaned on their chairs, waiting for the disaster they thought was about to happen. The boy who had dared her to play whispered something to his friends, and they all laughed under their breath. But Lena didn't look up. She stared at the piano keys, her fingers gently tracing the smooth surface as if greeting old friends she hadn't seen in years. Her hands trembled slightly. The room was too bright, too full of eyes watching, too many people waiting for her to fail. But inside her something began to stir. A small memory, soft and distant. It was her mother's voice, calm and kind, whispering, "Don't think of the people, just think of the sound." So she did. Her fingers pressed the first chord. It wasn't loud or fancy, just a simple blend of notes that echoed softly through the air. The sound surprised her, rich, alive, almost comforting. She played another chord, and this time it flowed smoother. Slowly, a gentle melody began to take shape. The laughter faded. The people closest to her turned their heads, puzzled by how steady her hands looked. A few whispered, "Wait, does she actually know how to play?" The young man who had started the prank raised an eyebrow, still smirking. "Probably memorized something," he said. But deep down, even he wasn't sure anymore. Lena didn't hear them. Her eyes were half closed, lost somewhere far away. She began to play a tune her mother had taught her when she was a child. A soft, emotional piece that spoke of love, loss, and quiet strength. Her fingers moved more confidently now, shaping each note with care. The music started as a whisper, but soon it grew stronger, like a hidden voice that had been waiting for years to be heard. The hall began to change. Conversations stopped one by one. The waiters froze mid-step. Even the clinking of glasses seemed to pause. The melody floated through the air like a story being told without words, a story about pain, memories, and hope. People exchanged glances, unsure how to react. This wasn't what they expected. The simple girl they had mocked was sitting at their grand piano, playing as if she had lived 100 lives. The woman of the house, who had been talking to guests near the buffet table, turned around when she heard the music. She frowned at first, confused by the sudden silence. But as soon as she saw the young worker at the piano, her expression softened. She didn't move. She just listened. Lena played with her whole heart. The notes poured out of her like water, finding its way through cracks. Her mind went back to the tiny apartment where she and her mother used to sit together every evening. She remembered the warm smell of tea, her mother's tired smile, and the sound of laughter that filled their small space. Every key she touched brought those memories alive again. It was like seeing her mother's face in the reflection of the piano's glossy surface. She could almost hear her saying, "When you play, don't hide what you feel. Let the piano do the talking." And so she did. The soft melody turned into something deeper. It began to rise, wrapping the room in emotion. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a conversation between the heart and the soul. The crowd who had gathered around her didn't dare to speak. The boy who had mocked her earlier felt a strange chill run down his spine. He looked at his friends, but none of them laughed now. They just stared, caught off guard by the beauty of what they were hearing. For those few minutes, the entire hall belonged to her. Her hands moved gracefully, flowing from one chord to another, blending sadness with peace, sorrow with strength. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't stop. The piano responded to her like it knew her story. Every hardship, every heartbreak, every piece of love she had lost. When the song reached its final notes, the air felt heavier, almost sacred. The last sound lingered like a breath that didn't want to end. Lena lifted her hand slowly, letting the silence settle. Nobody clapped. Not yet. It was as if the audience was afraid to break the spell. The quiet stretched for a long second until, finally, someone near the back whispered, "That was beautiful." The voice broke the silence, and suddenly the room came alive. Applause began softly, then grew louder, filling the hall. People stood from their seats, clapping and cheering. Even the host, who had been busy greeting guests earlier, looked astonished. Lena turned slightly, unsure what to do. Her face was red with embarrassment, but there was also something else, a quiet pride she hadn't felt in years. The host's wife walked over, her expression warm but filled with curiosity. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked gently. Lena stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "My mother taught me," she said softly. "She used to play." The woman smiled, touched by her answer. "She must have been a wonderful teacher." Lena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. She was everything. The guests gathered around, asking questions, offering compliments. Some even apologized for laughing earlier. The boy who had mocked her stayed behind, his face pale with guilt. He didn't say anything at first. When their eyes met, he just murmured, "I didn't know." Lena gave a small smile. "That's all right," she said kindly, though her heart was still pounding from the performance. As the night went on, she tried to return to her work, but people kept stopping her to talk about the music. One woman said she hadn't cried in years until that moment. Another said she hadn't heard anything that moving in her life. The pianist hired for the evening, who had been sitting quietly in the crowd, approached her too. "You play with feeling," he said simply. "Not everyone does." Lena thanked him shyly, unsure how to react to all the attention. When the party finally began to slow down, the staff gathered to clean up. Lena's hands still tingled from the performance. She could hardly believe what had just happened. It felt unreal, like a dream she didn't want to wake from. She didn't notice the host's wife watching her from across the room, speaking softly to her husband. They both looked toward Lena, who was carefully stacking dishes, her expression quiet and humble. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, the host's wife approached her again. "You should come back tomorrow," she said kindly. "We're hosting a charity event and we'd love for you to play." Lena blinked, surprised. "Me? But I'm not—" "Yes, you," the woman interrupted with a smile. "You have a gift, my dear, and people should hear it." For a moment, Lena didn't know what to say. She looked at the grand piano, still glowing under the dim lights. She thought of her mother again, of all the nights they had sat together dreaming of moments like this. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, when she returned home, she stood quietly in front of the old piano her mother had left behind. It was dusty, untouched for years. She ran her fingers over the cover and slowly lifted it. The keys looked the same as the ones she had played earlier that night, though older, a little worn. She sat down and pressed one note. The sound was weak, but it still carried the same magic. As tears filled her eyes, she whispered, "I played again, Mama." And for the first time in a long while, she smiled. Outside, the night was calm. The world hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but one thing was clear. She was done hiding her music. What had started as a cruel joke had awakened something powerful inside her, a forgotten piece of herself she never thought she'd find again. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the window of the small apartment. Lena woke up early, her body tired but her mind filled with thoughts from the night before. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the faces of the people at the party, the surprise in their eyes, the silence after her last note, the applause that followed. It all felt like a dream she didn't want to end. She sat on the edge of her bed for a while, staring at her hands. They were still sore from working, but the feeling of those piano keys hadn't left them. It was as if her fingers remembered everything, the rhythm, the warmth, the emotion. Her brother, still asleep in the next room, stirred slightly. He had school soon, and she needed to make breakfast before leaving for work again. But as she looked toward the old piano in the corner, covered with a thin layer of dust, she couldn't resist. Quietly, she pulled the cover off. The piano looked older than ever, but it still had that same familiar beauty. She ran her fingers across the keys and pressed one softly. The sound was slightly off, a little dull, but it made her smile. She played a few more notes, then the melody from last night, the one that had stopped everyone in their tracks. The room filled with gentle music. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For the first time in years, she felt something alive inside her. She didn't just remember her mother. She felt connected to her again. It was as if her mother's hands were guiding hers, like they used to when she was a child. When her brother woke up, he rubbed his eyes and smiled. "You're playing again," he said quietly. Lena smiled back. "Just for a little while." "You should play more," he said, his voice sleepy but honest. "It makes the house feel happy again." She felt tears rise in her eyes but quickly blinked them away. "Maybe I will," she whispered. After breakfast, she got ready and left for work. The same old routine. But something about her step was lighter. When she arrived at the mansion later that afternoon, the staff were already preparing for the charity event. The place looked even grander than the night before. There were flowers, banners, and a small stage set up near the piano. It was hard to believe she had sat at that same piano just hours earlier. Her supervisor spotted her and waved. "You're early," he said, sounding surprised. "Yes," she replied softly. "I thought I could help." He hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Good. They were asking about you earlier." She looked at him confused. "Who?" "The hosts," he said, "and a few guests too. Seems like you made quite an impression last night." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know whether to feel proud or nervous. A little later, the host's wife appeared, dressed elegantly as always. When she saw Lena, her face lit up. "I'm so glad you came back," she said warmly. "We're expecting some very special guests today, people who love music." "I told them about you." Lena blinked in disbelief. "You had told them about me?" "Yes," the woman said with a gentle laugh. "They want to hear you play again." "Don't worry, you'll be wonderful." Lena's hands fidgeted nervously. "I'm not a real performer, ma'am. I don't even know if I remember many songs." The woman placed a kind hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the best music doesn't come from professionals. It comes from people who play with feeling. You did that last night. Just be yourself." Those words settled softly in her heart. As the event began, guests arrived one by one. Businessmen, artists, a few local musicians, and even someone from a nearby music school. The piano sat in the center of the stage, waiting. Lena spent the first hour helping with refreshments, pretending not to think about it, though her stomach twisted with nerves. What if she made a mistake this time? What if the magic from last night was gone? But when the woman of the house approached her again and said, "It's time," she knew she couldn't back out. She walked slowly toward the piano. People turned to look at her. A few recognized her from the night before and smiled in encouragement. Others looked surprised. a young catering helper stepping onto the stage instead of a trained performer. The room quieted. Lena sat down, took a deep breath, and looked at the piano keys. Her reflection stared back at her, uncertain but stronger than before. She thought of her mother again. She thought of her brother's sleepy smile that morning. She thought of how music had once been the only thing that kept them together through hard times. Her fingers found the keys naturally. She began to play. This time she didn't start slow. The melody flowed with confidence, graceful and pure. It was a song her mother used to call the River of Days, one she had written herself when she was young. It was soft in the beginning, then grew stronger like the current of a river that never stopped moving. The audience listened closely. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound carry them. The music filled every corner of the hall, gentle, emotional, and filled with life. Lena's heart raced, but she didn't feel fear anymore. The piano was no longer a challenge. It was her voice. When the final note faded, the silence was thick and full of feeling. Then the applause came, not just polite clapping, but real, genuine appreciation. One of the guests, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Do you study music anywhere?" Lena shook her head shyly. "No, sir. My mother taught me when I was young, but I stopped after she passed away." The man looked thoughtful. "That's a loss for the world," he said quietly. "Music like that doesn't come from lessons. It comes from the soul." The host and his wife exchanged a look. "She has a gift," the woman said. "We've seen it twice now." Later, after the event ended, Lena helped the other workers clean up as usual. But this time, she wasn't invisible. People stopped to thank her, to compliment her, even to ask if she had a social media page where she shared her music. She laughed softly and said no. When she finally stepped outside that night, the cool breeze hit her face and she took a deep breath. The stars were shining above the large house, and for a moment, she stood there just listening to the faint sounds of music still echoing inside. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her supervisor. "The host wants to speak with you tomorrow. Don't be late." Her heart skipped again. She didn't know what that meant, good news or bad, but something told her this was only the beginning. That night she walked home instead of taking the bus. The streets were quiet and her thoughts were louder than ever. She kept replaying everything that had happened in the past 2 days. How quickly things had changed, from humiliation to applause, from silence to music. When she reached home, her brother was waiting by the door. "How did it go?" he asked eagerly. She smiled, tired but happy. "It went well," she said softly. "Better than I ever thought it could." He hugged her tightly, and for a moment, she felt all the weight of the past few years lift off her shoulders. That night, before going to bed, she sat once more at her mother's piano. The apartment was dark, but the moonlight through the window lit up the keys. She played quietly, a song she made up on the spot. Something hopeful, something new. The sound drifted through the small room, wrapping around her like warmth. She wasn't playing for anyone this time. She was playing for herself, for the girl who had been scared, who had forgotten how to dream. By the time she stopped, she felt lighter. She didn't know what the next day would bring when she returned to the mansion, but deep inside, she knew her life was beginning to change. Not because someone discovered her, but because she had finally rediscovered herself. What started as a cruel prank had now become a door opening to something she thought was lost forever. Her music, her confidence, her purpose. And though she didn't know it yet, that door was about to open wider than she could ever imagine. The next morning, the world felt different. The sun looked brighter, and even the usual noise of traffic seemed softer. Lena walked to work early again, her mind replaying every sound of the applause from the night before. She tried not to get too hopeful, but there was something inside her that wouldn't quiet down, a quiet excitement she hadn't felt in years. When she reached the mansion, the main gate was already open. Workers were busy cleaning up after the big event. As she walked in, her supervisor waved her over. "They're expecting you inside," he said. She blinked. "Who?" "The hosts," he said simply. "Go on, don't keep them waiting." Her heart began to race. She quickly fixed her apron and walked through the large hallway, her shoes echoing softly against the marble floor. The same piano stood in the corner, gleaming in the morning light. She paused for a second to look at it, her reflection faintly visible on its surface. Then a calm voice called out, "Come in." The host and his wife were sitting in the drawing room, sipping tea. Their expressions were warm, not stern, which made her feel a little more at ease. "Good morning," the wife said with a smile. "Please sit down," Lena hesitated. She wasn't used to sitting in the same room as them like an equal, but the woman gestured again kindly and she obeyed. The host leaned forward. "We wanted to thank you for yesterday," he began. "Your performance touched everyone. People haven't stopped talking about it." Lena lowered her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I didn't mean to cause a scene, I just played what I knew," the woman smiled. "That's exactly why it was so special. You played with heart. You reminded people why music matters." There was a brief silence. The man looked thoughtful, then asked, "Tell me, have you ever considered studying music again?" Her hands froze in her lap. "No, sir," she said softly. I can't afford to. I had to stop when my mother passed away. Since then, I've just been working." The couple exchanged a look. The wife leaned forward. "If you were given the chance, if someone helped you, would you want to continue?" The question took her breath away. "Of course," she said quietly. "It's always been my dream. I just never thought it could happen." The host nodded slowly. "Well, maybe it can." Lena's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "One of the guests at yesterday's event was the director of a local music conservatory. He was very impressed by you. He asked for your name. I gave it to him." Her heart skipped a beat. "You did?" "Yes," the woman said gently. "He wants to meet you. He said your playing reminded him of why he became a musician in the first place." Lena couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She felt like she was floating, caught between disbelief and hope. The woman placed a hand over hers. "We think you should go. Take the day off, meet him, and see what happens." Lena finally managed to whisper, "Thank you. Thank you so much," the woman smiled. "Don't thank us yet. Just promise one thing, I'd never stop playing." Lena nodded, her eyes glistening. A few hours later, she stood outside the conservatory, a tall, old building with ivy crawling up the walls and the faint sound of music drifting from open windows. Students were walking in and out, carrying sheet music and instruments. For a moment, she felt out of place again. She looked down at her simple clothes, her worn shoes, and almost turned away. But then she remembered her mother's voice, whispering softly in her heart, "Don't run from what you love." Taking a deep breath, she walked inside. The receptionist greeted her politely, already expecting her. "You must be Lena," she said with a warm smile. "The director is waiting in his office." Her palms were sweating as she followed down a long hallway lined with framed photographs of musicians and students. When she finally stepped into the director's office, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes stood up to greet her. "Ah, you must be the young woman I heard play last night," he said with a gentle smile. "Please sit." Lena nodded and sat down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. I must tell you," he said. "I've been teaching music for over 30 years, and it's rare to hear someone who plays the way you do. You have something that can't be taught." She blushed slightly. "Thank you, sir. My mother taught me when I was little." He nodded. "She must have been a wonderful teacher." "She was," Lena said softly. "But I stopped playing after she passed. Life got difficult." The director studied her face carefully, then said, "Would you be willing to play something for me now?" Her heart leaped into her throat. "Now?" "Yes," he said kindly. "Don't worry. This isn't a test. Just play whatever comes to you." He led her into a small practice room with a grand piano in the center. The walls were lined with shelves of music sheets and old records. She sat down, hands trembling slightly. At first she hesitated. The air felt heavy, and the pressure of being in a real music school made her nervous. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers move. She didn't play a famous song this time. She played something she made up, a simple melody that told her story without words. Every note carried a piece of her life. Her mother's laughter, the nights she cried quietly, the years she worked in silence, and the moment she found herself again at that party. The room filled with emotion. The sound was soft but powerful, fragile yet full of strength. When she finished, there was silence. The director didn't move for several seconds, then he said quietly, "You remind me of someone who once played not to impress others, but to heal herself." "That's rare." Lena looked down, unsure what to say. He smiled gently. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a place here. We have a scholarship program for talented musicians who can't afford lessons. You'd fit perfectly. She froze. A scholarship? Yes, he said. You wouldn't have to pay for classes. You'd learn from professionals, practice daily, and maybe even perform in front of audiences again. All I ask is that you give it your full heart. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said kindly. Lena laughed softly through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll do it, the director smiled. Good. Then welcome to the conservatory. When she walked out of that building an hour later, the world looked new again. The streets seemed brighter, the air fresher, the sound of the city like music itself. She pulled out her phone and called her brother. Guess what? She said, her voice shaking with joy. I got into a music school. His shout of excitement made her laugh out loud. I knew it. I knew you could do it. That night back at home, Lena sat at their old piano again. This time she didn't play softly. She played with joy, with hope, with the confidence of someone who had finally been seen. Her brother sat nearby, listening quietly, smiling from ear to ear. You sound different, he said. I feel different, she replied. For the first time, I know I'm where I belong. As she played, the room seemed to glow. It was still the same small apartment, but it felt filled with light. The kind of light that only comes when someone rediscovers their purpose. And while she didn't know what challenges waited ahead, she knew one thing for sure. She would never let anyone make her feel small again. The girl who had been forced to play as a joke had found her voice, and this time, she wasn't going to stop using it. What began as a prank had become the beginning of a dream her mother would have been proud to see. And as the last notes faded into the night, Lena smiled, whispering softly, Thank you, Mama, for never letting me forget who I am. Lena's first day at the conservatory felt like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. As she stepped into the grand hall, the sound of pianos, violins, and voices practicing filled the air. The scent of polished wood and sheet music wrapped around her like a memory. For a moment, she stood frozen near the entrance, clutching her small bag tightly, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe she was really there, in a place she had only ever passed by from a distance, peeking through the glass like a stranger. Now she was a student. A kind assistant named Clara handed her a folder. Here's your schedule, and this is your practice room key. You'll have your first lesson in the West Wing at 9, she said with a smile. Don't worry, everyone's nervous at first. Lena smiled back shyly. Thank you. She wandered through the hallways, glancing at the framed photographs on the walls, famous pianists, past graduates, and orchestra performances that had made history. It was intimidating but inspiring. She knew she didn't look like most of the students there. They wore fine clothes, carried expensive instruments, and moved with confidence. But Lena had something else, the quiet determination that came from surviving struggle. Her first class was musical interpretation. The teacher, a strict-looking woman with short gray hair, stood at the front of the room. Around 12 students sat at desks, each holding sheet music. Lena took a seat in the back. Today, the teacher said, I want to hear what music means to you. Not just notes, not just rhythm, emotion. Let's start with you. She pointed directly at Lena. Lena froze. Me? Yes, the teacher said with a raised brow. Come to the piano. Lena's heart raced. She stood up slowly, walked to the front, and sat at the instrument. All eyes were on her. Some students whispered quietly. She heard a few chuckles, the kind that used to sting. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The melody started softly, uncertain, but then it grew. It wasn't perfect, and she missed a few notes, but it was honest. Her music told a story of fear turning into courage, of sadness melting into hope. When she finished, there was a long silence. The teacher's expression softened. That, she said, is what I mean by emotion. Technique will come later. You already understand what many forget. Music must speak from the heart. Lena nodded, trying to hide the tears that were forming. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged somewhere. After class, a few students approached her. One of them, a cheerful girl named Talia, smiled. That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that? My mother taught me, Lena replied. She must have been a great teacher, Talia said kindly. Lena smiled. She was. Over the next few weeks, Lena's days were full of lessons, practice, and discovery. She spent hours in the practice rooms, her fingers dancing over the keys until they hurt. The sound of her music filled the quiet corners of the building. Sometimes students passing by would stop to listen through the door, but not everyone was kind. One afternoon, as she practiced a piece for her upcoming student recital, two students walked in, a tall boy with neat hair and a girl with a jeweled watch. They leaned against the wall watching her play. When she finished, the boy smirked. "You're the girl from that party, right? The cleaning girl?" Lena's fingers froze on the keys. "I heard about you," the girl added. "Everyone was talking about how you just started playing out of nowhere." "Must have been lucky." Lena stayed quiet. She had learned that silence was sometimes the best reply. The boy laughed. "Don't take it the wrong way. You're good, for someone who hasn't had real training. But this place, it's not for beginners." They turned and left before she could say anything. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving her alone with her thoughts. For a moment, her confidence faltered. The old doubts crept back, that she didn't belong, that people saw her as less. But then she looked at the piano again. This was her world now. She couldn't let anyone take that from her. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers back on the keys, and played louder than before. That night, when she got home, her brother was waiting with dinner. "How was it today?" he asked, handing her a plate. "Hard," she admitted, smiling faintly. "But good. I think I'm learning a lot," he grinned. "I know you'll make it. You always do." Lena nodded, though her heart was still heavy. After dinner, she went to their small piano and played quietly, replaying the day's lessons. Music had become her language, her way of answering the world. Weeks passed, and the recital day drew closer. Every student was required to perform in front of the faculty and guests. It was a big moment, one that could open doors for future performances. Lena practiced harder than ever. She even came early in the mornings to play before classes started. One morning, while she was practicing, the director walked in. "I was hoping to hear you," he said with a smile. "How's everything going?" "It's going well, sir," she replied. "I'm still learning." He nodded. "You've come a long way in a short time. But remember, don't let the noise around you shake your focus. Talent can get attention, but discipline builds greatness." "I understand," she said softly. He smiled. "Good. I'm looking forward to your recital performance." After he left, Lena sat in silence for a moment. His words stayed with her. When the recital day finally arrived, the hall was full of people. Families, teachers, and music lovers filled the seats. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous whispers. Lena stood backstage, her heart pounding. She peeked through the curtain and saw the same couple from the mansion sitting in the audience. They waved when they spotted her, and she smiled nervously. One by one, students went up to perform. Their fingers flew across the keys with precision and speed. The crowd clapped politely after each performance. Finally, it was Lena's turn. As she walked on stage, the lights felt blinding. The piano sat in the center, shining under the spotlight. She took a deep breath, bowed slightly, and sat down. For a few seconds, the hall was completely silent. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Her melody was soft at first, almost like a whisper. It carried traces of her mother's lullabies, the sound of rain on her window, and the quiet nights she had spent dreaming. Then it grew bolder, stronger, filled with the rhythm of her journey, the struggles, the laughter, the pain, and the hope. The audience leaned in. There was something about her music that drew people in, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Every note told a story that words couldn't. When she finished, the final note lingered in the air. Then the hall erupted in applause. Lena looked up, dazed, as people stood to their feet, clapping and cheering. The director smiled proudly from the front row. The couple from the mansion wiped tears from their eyes. For the first time, Lena didn't bow out of nervousness. She bowed with pride. After the recital, people came to congratulate her. The same students who had once doubted her now looked at her differently. Even the tall boy who had mocked her earlier approached awkwardly. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "I guess I was wrong about you." Lena smiled gently. "That's okay. Music changes how people see things." That night, when she got home, her brother was waiting by the window. "I saw the video," he said, grinning. You were amazing, Lena laughed. It didn't even feel real. He hugged her tightly. You deserve every bit of it. As she sat down at their small piano again, she looked around their tiny apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was home, the place where her journey began. She touched the keys softly, smiling to herself. The girl who once scrubbed floors now filled concert halls with music. The same piano that had once been part of a prank had become the symbol of her destiny. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new performances, and maybe even chances she couldn't imagine yet. Still, one thing was certain. She was no longer afraid to play because now, she understood, her music didn't just belong to her. It belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked, everyone who had been told they weren't enough. And as the night grew quiet, Lena played one last song before bed, a promise to herself that she would never stop. Months passed since Lena's recital at the conservatory. The applause of that night still echoed in her memory, but her days were now filled with hard work, long hours, and a growing belief that music could change lives, not just her own. She had become one of the top students. The teachers admired her focus, and even her classmates who once doubted her now came to her for advice. Yet Lena stayed humble. She knew that fame or praise wasn't the real goal. For her, it was always about the music, about the way it spoke when words couldn't. One afternoon, as she practiced in one of the quiet rooms, the director walked in with a letter in his hand. "Lena," he said, smiling, "I have some news for you." She turned from the piano, wiping her hands. "Is something wrong?" He laughed softly. "No, not at all. Quite the opposite. You've been selected to represent our conservatory at the National Young Artist Concert in the capital." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "It's a great honor. You'll perform in front of hundreds, maybe even people from abroad. It's a chance to show the world what you can do." For a moment, Lena couldn't speak. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." The director shook his head gently. "You are. You've earned it. The only question is, are you willing to believe it?" She nodded slowly. "I am." The following weeks were intense. Lena practiced day and night, balancing her studies and the preparation for the big concert. Sometimes she'd stay so late that the janitor would have to remind her to go home. One evening, after hours of rehearsal, her hands ached. She placed them on her lap and sighed. She missed her mother terribly, missed her soft voice saying, "You don't play the piano with your fingers, Lena. You play it with your heart." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I wish you were here." The day of the concert arrived. The city's grand concert hall was packed. Reporters stood near the entrance, flashing cameras, capturing the young talents who had come from all over the country. The hall glowed with chandeliers and the air buzzed with excitement. Lena stood backstage wearing a simple black dress. She didn't have the glittering gown some others wore, but it didn't matter. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. She peeked through the curtain. In the front row sat the director, her friends from the conservatory, and unto her surprise, the couple from the mansion. They waved warmly when they saw her. Her brother sat beside them, looking nervous but proud. Lena smiled faintly. All the people who had believed in her were there. That was all she needed. When her name was called, she stepped out into the bright light. The applause felt like a wave crashing over her. She walked to the piano, bowed, and sat down. The hall grew quiet. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes were gentle, like a whisper. She played a piece she had written herself, one she had composed in secret during her late-night practice sessions. It was called "The Light Within." It began with the sound of longing, soft and uncertain, then slowly built into something strong and full of hope. Every note told her story, from the day she touched the piano at that party, to the long nights when she doubted herself, to the moment she decided to rise again. People in the audience leaned forward. They could feel it, the honesty, the struggle, the beauty in her playing. The melody wasn't about showing off skill. It was about truth. As the music swelled, Lena felt tears in her eyes. She remembered her mother's hands guiding hers on the keys, her laughter filling their small home. She remembered the pain of losing everything, the humiliation of being treated as a joke. But most of all, she remembered the moment she found her courage again. When she reached the final part of the piece, the music slowed. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. The last note hung in the air like a breath held too long. then faded softly into silence. For a few seconds there was nothing but stillness. Then the audience stood up all at once. The hall roared with applause. People cheered, whistled, and shouted her name. Some were even crying. Lena sat there in shock, her heart pounding. She looked up and saw the director clapping proudly, his eyes shining. Her brother stood on his chair, shouting, "That's my sister." She laughed through her tears, stood and bowed deeply. After the concert, the director hugged her. "You made them feel something real," he said quietly. "That's the mark of a true artist." Even the critics who had attended the event wrote glowing reviews the next day. One headline read, "Unknown girl from humble beginnings leaves audience speechless." Soon offers started coming in. Small performances, interviews, invitations to collaborate with other musicians. Lena was overwhelmed, but she stayed grounded. She remembered where she came from. She still took the bus to school, still played on the old piano at home, and still helped her brother with dinner. One afternoon, while she was practicing at home, there was a knock on the door. When she opened it, the woman from the mansion stood there holding a small box. "May I come in?" she asked gently. "Of course," Lena said, smiling. The woman walked to the piano, looking around the modest apartment. "You've come so far," she said softly. "Do you remember that night? When they made you play as a joke?" Lena smiled faintly. "I do," the woman nodded. "It's strange how life works. Sometimes what's meant to humiliate us becomes the thing that saves us." She handed Lena the box. "This belonged to my mother. She was a pianist too. I think she would have wanted you to have it." Lena opened the box and gasped. Inside was a small gold pendant shaped like a musical note. I can't accept this," she said. "You can," the woman replied. "You've reminded me what real music feels like." Lena hugged her tightly. "Thank you." That night, Lena sat at her piano wearing the pendant. She played quietly, the melody soft and full of peace. Her brother listened from the couch, smiling. "What's next for you?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, still playing. "Maybe I'll teach. Maybe I'll perform. But whatever I do, I'll keep playing." He nodded. "You always will." Years later, Lena did become a teacher at the conservatory, the same one that had once given her a chance. Her students came from all backgrounds, some rich, some poor, but she treated them all the same. She taught them not just how to play, but why to play, to express, to heal, to connect. Whenever a nervous student doubted themselves, she would smile and say, "Don't be afraid. I was once where you are now. Believe in your music. It can take you farther than you imagine." And every year when she played in the grand hall again, she would look out into the audience and see new faces, young, hopeful, full of dreams. She always played the light within, the piece that had changed everything. It reminded her of who she was, where she came from, and how far she had come. The story of the girl who was once forced to play as a joke had turned into something bigger, a story of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of believing in yourself. And though the world knew her now as a respected pianist and teacher, Lena never forgot that she was once just a girl with calloused hands, an old piano, and a dream her mother had planted in her heart. On quiet nights, when the world outside was still, she would sit alone at her piano, close her eyes and play, not for fame, not for applause, but for the memory of where it all began. The soft notes would drift into the air, carrying with them a story of how kindness, courage, and music can change everything, even when it starts as a simple prank at a party. And when she played that final note, she always smiled, whispering the same words she did years ago. "Thank you, Mama, for never letting me forget who I am